Hello, VR makers. This is Luis, your friend from MIT, and let's talk about scoping. So you've been put into groups, and now you're going to have to actually create a virtual reality project. We want you to plan for that project and scope it out in a very specific way. So during the rest of the semester, you're going to have to do things like ideating on your project, prototyping. You're going to actually have to scope the aesthetics of it, the mechanics of it, and you're going to have to publish something. Well, now normally people have a different kind of experience than what we want you to have while working in a group project. So most people are actually used to, in school you're going to find your best friends when you have to do a group project. Then you're going to get together and have a meeting and talk about sort of what you want to do with your homework assignment or something like this. Then everybody goes home, work on their own individual parts, and then everyone gets together at the very end of the semester, and one friend brings the car, the other one brings the other part of the diagram, and then on the day of submission, you put all the pieces together, and then you're all done. Now, unfortunately, because you're working with Unity, that is just not going to work. And part of the reason of that is if you, in the end of the semester, put all your pieces together, you're likely going to encounter something like a build error that's going to stop everything, or you're going to realize that your project is extremely nauseating. So we're actually going to have you do things in a slightly different way. So the first thing you're going to have to do is ideate, and everyone has to do this together in a group. Everyone has to be in an agreement of what the project should look like. But then the second thing, you can actually work in parallel and divide your team into two different groups. A part of the group is going to be working on this scoping exercise and making sure that everything is well planned, while the other part of your group is going to start working on prototypes. And these could be physical prototypes, these could be paper prototypes, but they can also be Unity prototypes. Very, very early testing, and just to give an idea whether or not your project makes any sense. Then you're going to actually divide the group, and there's going to be some parallel work here. Some people are going to be working on the aesthetics, creating assets, recording music, making 3D models, or finding 3D models, while someone else is working on the Unity side of things, either programming or setting up the virtual reality environment. And maybe someone else is doing project management or setting up a GitHub repository. But the important part is that the first step happens in parallel with your teammates doing different things. Then you're actually going to build, and this is going to happen very early on, meaning the aesthetics people are going to put all of their assets into the project. Everyone's going to get together and you're going to build as soon as you can. And then what you're going to do is actually iterate through that process. So you're going to go from the build, you're going to improve on the mechanics, you're going to improve on the aesthetics, and you're going to build again. And the key for success is being able to do this dance as many times as possible. Now, it's important to leave some time at the end as well, because you're going to have to deliver things other than just the application. So part of it is going to involve generating media relating to your project. So this is either going to be a short video or capturing some screenshots. Some people are going to be writing text for stores or different publications or whatever you want to do and how you want to share the project to the world. And some of you may actually want to publish the project somewhere. So you want to make sure that there's time for that at the very end. So how do we scope things? The way I like to scope, I use a software called Notion, and I'm going to go a little bit over that. But you can actually do this in any sort of platform that allows you to create shared documents. The first thing I do is I scope the mechanics. And I want you all to do that as well. So by scoping the mechanics, I mean you're going to create a document that contains information about every single type of interaction that can happen in your game. So one of them, for instance, is moving, and you have to be specific on this scope. If you're going to move by teleportation, by gliding, if you're going to have snap turn. Another interaction might be grabbing things. Another one might be throwing items. Another one might be consuming food or anything like that. You want to make sure that you write down. And the secret to success is to having as little interactions as possible. You can do a lot with very few interactions, and the more you add, the more likely you're going to be adding complexity that can only be tackled by one person at a time and not in parallel. So this is key. I also like to have a list of items, meaning grabbable items versus non-grabbable items versus maybe you have scenery. and general information about sort of what is the Unity complexity of the project. You're going to create a document that everyone agrees on. Then you're going to actually scope the aesthetics. So the way this depends from project to project, but I like to make sure that you are iterating on the aesthetics from a very simple to redraw medium to increasingly complex one. So all my projects actually have a top-down bird's eye view drawing of a map or an environment that it's going to be in. So this is an example from a project that I had a few years ago, and we had multiple levels and they all had drawings like this. And it's really good to have them draw by hand, because if you decide, I don't actually like this passageway, you can very easily make another drawing or start from scratch, or simply erase a little part and iterate as much as possible on your actual design of the environment. But sometimes you have things like puzzles or environmental experiences, in which case you might want to be creative with how you actually scope it. So this is a puzzle that we were designing that was sort of a 3D puzzle, and this is how we decided to scope the aesthetics. The same happens for audio. So at the same time, if you have original music in your project, you might actually want to create mock-ups of what it's going to sound like, sound effects. This was we had different ways of filter the voice that we wanted to have in our app, and we were all iterating through this and keeping it in our shared document under the aesthetics scope. Then you're going to do your development scope, and this is probably going to be the most important document. I like to have a checklist system, and I'm going to highly encourage you to do the same. And in general, what that means is you're going to have multiple versions, one of which ends with a build. So if we go back to this original idea, all of each version that you're going to separate your development scope is going to include everything that should exist on your first build, on your second, and as many as you hope to have. So for instance, in here, you can see I have a checklist, and on version 1, we're going to only have very simple things, only one way of moving, so fly teleportation. We're going to have these items in it, and we're going to have these kinds of interaction, just grabbing or just snap turning. And this is not a good example for you to follow, because this project was a lot larger. It was not a project for this class, so yours should be much smaller than this. But you're also going to write down your version 2. What else are you going to add on your second build? And the idea of separating it like this is that it's very easy as you start developing, before you do your first build, to start implementing things that should actually be on your second build and not in your first one. So by planning out what you're going to add to your Unity project before you actually start doing it, help make sure that you can actually build before you move into adding things like other types of locomotion or other types of interaction. Once you have that, a very common thing that happens a lot in the game industry is you're going to create something called a gray box. And essentially this is a very simple, if you have an environment, for instance, a very simple representation of the space you're going to be populating with objects and with maybe photogrammetric scans. And you want to do this with only cubes and the primitive Unity cube. And the reason we do this is you can then actually build a version that is gray boxed, meaning you have the environment done with only cubes, and play test it. And it's going to be super crucial that you play test it enough, because in VR things are very unintuitive. Very often people make experiences that require the player to move long distances without needing, and you can only tell these things when you're play testing. So I highly recommend you creating a gray box, probably on your version 1 or version 2 of the app. And what you're going to do is you're going to find that a lot of things have to change, and so it's going to be much easier for you to simply change where a wall is if there's not a bunch of objects already populating the scene. So it's very important. On the top I have an example from another app that I made called Gaia, where we actually gray boxed with 3D scoping in VR. So it was very easy for us to simply just create an entire new environment by modeling in a 3D VR software, and which is kind of like foam-like, and just iterate through it. But it's very important that gray boxing is very easy. I'm using the word very a lot. That it's very easy for you to just throw away everything you have and start fresh without worrying about losing too much work. Again, just want to remind you that you want to build as many times as possible. You will encounter errors, and you have to to prepare for that. So a big part of all these work is actually to play test as many times as possible. And then again, you might have some platforms that you want to put your app in. SideQuest is a really good one if you're working with a Pico, because it actually is hardware agnostic. And so I might want you to look into, if you're hoping to publish your final project, to what are sort of the assets that you need in order to publish. Some of them require a long description, a short description, maybe a subtitle and some images or a video. And it's good to think ahead in that when you're planning your scoping exercise as well. So for your assignment, you're going to have to do a bunch of things that are written down, but one of them is going to create a scope calendar. And this is essentially it. You're going to create a document that includes the title of your project. You're going to include all of the things that need to be done in parallel, and it should be clear in a non-linear fashion, meaning I can look at it once and have a good idea of what is happening in parallel and what is happening sequentially. And you're going to actually populate them with dates of when each of the steps are going to be happening or be completed by. And I also want you to color code these steps by the names of the people on your team. And we're going to go over this, and we're going to make sure that it makes sense, that what you're proposing to build is going to be completed in time. So this is what you're going to have to do. If you're confident that you understand how the scoping works, you're done watching this video. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next Friday. If you would like to stick around, I will share with you how I would normally go about doing this in Notion. So I've created over here a mock project in this application called Notion. It's a website, and I believe it gives you educational licenses for free if you're at MIT. So you could create one for your group, and everyone can collaborate over here. So here I have our main project folder and a bunch of different pages on them. So I'm going to start by looking at the mechanics scope, and I'm going to open a new tab. So I would start by simply writing down all of the interactions. So maybe you can grab objects, and maybe you're doing a dance or a learn how to ride a bike experience. So one of them is to pedal, things like that. The locomotion is going to have snap, turn, and then it's going to have teleportation. And you're going to fill out this mechanics scope before you do anything else. Then we're going to have the aesthetics scope. And you may add here a storyboard or your music mockups, but you also might want to list things like we're going to have 3 levels, or you're going to maybe put a table that is going to include all of the models that you know for sure you're going to need. Another thing you're going to have to do is the development scope, and this is this part. So I like to separate them into version 1, version 2, and the sort of the final version. And I'll add here as a checkbox, as part of the aesthetics, we're going to have the gray, we're going to have just the boxy version of level 1. In terms of content, we're going to say no content. A boxy, that's what he was correcting. So the mechanics, we're just going to have teleportation. We're not going to worry with making it grabbable, and we're going to have no sound, and make sure that we can build something that works on the headset. On version 2, we may actually have sketch music. We may actually have the snap turn that we talked about before. We may actually have to have textures on the environment, or version 2 of the boxy environment. So you're going to populate this all before you create your schedule in the end. And I also like to have a documentation page where you can have things like the synopsis, the names of everyone in the team, the contact information for everyone in the team. If there are usernames for different applications you may need, you can put that information over here. And as I'm developing the person in Unity, I highly recommend keeping a release note version. So for instance, you completed the first version of your scope, the first step, you can have here sort of, you've created a Unity, you've implemented locomotion. And then if I go back to Unity and work a little bit more, I'm going to create a 1.2.0 or a 1.1.2 or 1, whatever, it doesn't matter. And you're going to say, okay, now I've implemented the snap turn. I've changed settings from A to B. And this is just so you can keep track. If something breaks, you can always look back into your release notes and understand what you have to revert in order to make things work again. And it's always good to have an ideas part. So these are some other projects that I worked on. So this was an app that I've created. And this is how our scope looked like. So like I went over with you guys, we had a very simple version 1, a version 2 that had a little bit more things, and a version 3 and 4, and so on, things that we've never finished or never implemented. You can see for our project, we needed to have sound, a script, aesthetics, and mechanics. And that's all. Then we have our release notes, and it kind of looks like this. So every time I would work on it, I would commit to GitHub, I would add information over here. So every time it broke, I could just trace it back and sort of fix things. We also had a mockups page, which is sort of your aesthetic scope, where we had different ideas of what the app should look like and what the logos should look like and what screens we should have. And we used that page for it. This is another example of another project that I work on. This is a VR project. So we had a levels page where we had the aesthetic scoping over here of every single different level. And we actually broke it down even further, that some levels had its own page where we would write notes and, this should probably be different, and make a page like this. We had our mechanics scoping, which had, over here we have moving, we have ability to eat food. We had a chart, sort of what things happen in each level. So you can grab, there are keys on this level, there are throwable objects on this one. And we also had a release note and a general scoping. Where is the scoping? Mechanics design. Master scope, is that what it is? No, I don't know where that is, but you get the point. It all would depend on the project that you're working on. So make sure to make something that makes sense. And you don't have to finish the entire scoping for your assignment for next week, but you definitely need to finish your calendar scope. So the one where you have all the dates where you're going to complete things. I hope that made sense. Again, feel free to talk to me and send me a message if you're having any trouble, and good luck.